Well, good afternoon, Scott Baker.
Mikey Ames, how are you today? Time for another edition of Lead Better. Welcome to everybody that's listening, watching. Today is the discussion is around field note number 1644. Very straightforward title. What makes a leader approachable? This is a good one. The field note is a little bit longer than you might expect on a question like, we should all be kind of approachable. And there's sort of three sections. There's the kind of more obvious section. Then there's the sort of admired leadership, but here's an idea you might think about.
Great.
And then it ends in a different third where it's like, there's some leaders who just totally try to screw all the rest of this stuff up on purpose. And so we're going to kind of go through all of that. But approachability on the surface, do you think you find many leaders, Mikey, who would be like, I'm not approachable?
I don't find a whole lot that are like that. I do know the tendency of some leaders to feel like, they like the power that comes from feeling like they intimidate other people.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, they kind of make themselves less approachable. I don't know if they set out to be less approachable as much as
but if you ask them, they do, of course I'm approachable. But inside they know they're not.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So I did a couple things in preparation for this conversation.
Okay.
Like I'm want to do. I usually am anticipating if any kind of study is cited. Like we didn't cite a specific study. There are so many studies around approachability that have been done. We didn't really feel the need to highlight one in particular. And so the way that
studies say.
Yeah. So we just kind of mentioned it in general. And so when we have field notes that studies say, I have the tendency to pop that over in Google and read the top couple of abstracts that they're just to kind of understand.
Is that true? Is that really true?
Yes. Well, not from an editing point of view, but from a point of view that says, like, what insight can I bring into this conversation? I learned a couple of things. Number one, we are already ranking on Google for this particular topic.
Oh, wow. How about that?
This morning's field note, right?
Well, now maybe Google knows that you're looking.
That was my first thought.
Right,
so the next thing I did is I put it in incognito mode, and and the results came exactly the same way. So I texted the exact search terms that I use to my wife and said, Google this and tell me if admired leadership comes up in the AI results.
Interesting.
Because for me, and it did. Now the difference is, for me, it came up on the admired leadership homepage. Like, because we have our archive of field notes.
We do an archive on our homepage, but it's also on the Substack main registry. Yeah.
For my wife, her results came up as first, but it was Substack instead of our.
Interesting.
So whatever we're doing on SEO, it's doing it correctly. I didn't mean to
Thank you all for participating in our conversation on SEO, right? Yeah.
Right. But the other thing that actually did come up that was interesting was one particular study where they got together a bunch of obstetricians in an academic center to participate in understanding whether or not leaders are approachable. They approached it from the problem of, it's possible that most business literature is from the idea of, like, how do I speak up properly? Like, when I feel like this, it's a brave thing for me to have to speak up, especially when I'm calling a leader out for being wrong. How do I do that in an effective way? And this particular study that I read approached it and said, we have a novel idea. What if it's the leaders who are not being approachable that is the problem, instead of people not feeling the gumption to be able to speak up? So they got together obstetricians in an academic setting, and they planted a discussion in such a way where there were going to be 5 incorrect things that they called challenge moments.
Okay.
So the obstetrician said something incorrectly with the idea that we'll see how...
Who challenges, if anybody steps up and says, wait a minute, hold on. Yeah.
Right. So,
by the way, can I just say, when you first said that they got together a group of obstetricians, one, I was thinking already, I'm not sure that that's the first category for people that would have a sophisticated look at leadership approachability. And then I thought, no, I'm wrong. Because if you're in that moment when you're trying to get the baby to come out and be born, you want an obstetrician who's approachable.
Right, right.
In fact, it's the very first thing that this human being will do on the face of the earth is approach the obstetrician.
Right. And so
that's my little
So, and it is interesting that it's doctors who are being challenged in this study specifically because they are quite smart. They are an intelligent cohort to be able to approach. And so the further you go up the leadership ladder, you might also have the same type of feeling. Like I wouldn't be here unless I was smart. I wouldn't be here unless I was a decisive person who knew what they were doing. Getting all this kind of input from everybody else, especially the patient on the table, is something that I don't want to do, right? But that puts you at a severe disadvantage, which is mentioned in our field note today, right? You don't get the feedback that you should be getting, right? You're late to hearing it, not just actually literally hearing it, but people being willing to deliver it to you. And so after participating in this interprofessional simulation, faculty participants reflected that being an approachable team leader requires more than simply avoiding disruptive behaviors. So most of the people who were being studied here on debrief I thought just approachability meant provided I don't disrupt people from talking, but that's all I need to be in order to be approachable. And so they got the same kind of result that we're talking about here, is that you need to figure out how to make speaking up in situations not being considered an act of bravery, right? It just needs to be normal.
It should be regular.
For people to be able to do that. So it was a fun little result, but that result was number 2.
It was number 2. Well, and what's interesting is that, Admired Leadership and our executive coaches over decades have worked actually with a lot of physicians and medical teams. And even though it's different than our work with, say, people in banking or finance or in hedge funds or in healthcare, other big, sort of management operations where you might have a tremendous number of direct reports. Only a few doctors end up being like the chief doctor of the hospital. Most doctors will have smaller practices or smaller teams, but their ability to give feedback or build relationships of trust and make decisions and all of these things, and be looking for what the point of this field note is, which is, are you getting the information that you need to get? That's very much, it's as important as when you would say, who's the leader on the basketball team? It might only be 5 people, but what's the nature of how that team is coming together? So it's crucial for doctors and for everybody. And you underlined the key point there, which is in the first third of this field note, it's kind of saying to the leader, this is not just about like, hey, you're doing a good job because you got an open door policy, people feel like they can talk to you. The motive here is that might be great in terms of helping people improve their performance, but it's more for the leader to say, what are you not hearing? Because there's a lot going on in your organization, on your team, and if you're not approachable, you are deficient because there's a lot of pieces of information that are just not getting to you. So that's a big why at the beginning of this field note on this issue of approachability. And then we get into this next one, which is this idea that kind of comes in midway through the field note of, but there's one thing that certain leaders kind of do to amp up this approachability. And this is one where I thought you probably have a feeling about it, because it's not that it's disingenuous, but it does take it into a little bit of a more unusual territory than maybe most leaders have thought about.
Right. And that one thing is they also seek advice from team members about non-work and non-task issues.
Exactly right. So they're trying to show you can talk to me about anything. Like we have this problem, I want you to tell me. But I'm going to reach out and say, hey, I know you've been researching this particular topic, running shoes. Where did you end up? What did you choose? Like, did you try the other one? What did you think of that? I know you're more knowledgeable than I am, and I'm just starting, whatever. Like, then that kind of conversation, and I think that's what the field note is trying to say, which is show that you are about in these conversations more than just, what are you telling me, right?
Yes.
It's say, are you a human being? I appreciate your expertise, not only on the job, but off the job. And I'm paying attention enough that it shows that I remember that you are really sophisticated about your running gear.
Yes. And so we've got leaders who are listening right now who are thinking to themselves, okay, I do have this problem. I acknowledge it. As a matter of fact, it's probably going to take some training for me to, retrain my team to know that I am approachable. And most people would stop and just be like, okay, I'm going to stop cutting people off in the middle of their question. I'm going to stop doing all the things that I've done that actually trains them to not speak up in public situations. But all you're doing by cutting those behaviors out is you're cutting out the things that make you disruptive. Here is the actual behavior that says, how do you actually retrain people? Not just bring them to neutral, but actually train them to actually speak up. And so if you are sitting there thinking, okay, I'm not going to say anything, I'm going to allow people to pry into my life. They're going to ask me questions, I'm going to let those questions. I'm not going to bark at them, I'm going to provide real answers. But you sitting there just not being disruptive, people aren't going to ask you. And so this behavior that we mention here is brilliant because it's basically saying, I'm asking for advice. So in a lot of ways, I'm going to pry out the pieces of my life that you're not going to ask questions about anyway because you're afraid to. And I'm going to go ahead and state the question for us.
Yeah, and there's just a deeper relationality there. Now, we have had other field notes and we have other leadership content around the nature of how personal, close should a leader be with their team. And leaders that really want to be liked oftentimes lean too far. They're hanging out, after hours, they're trying to be one of the boys, whatever it is, and it doesn't, that can have its own set of complications. And so a lot of times our advice to leaders is you do want to be personable, you want to be engaged, you want to know your people, but there also needs to be a little bit of a sense of distance, which is sometimes a gift to the team.
Yes.
And it's not being like, I'm better than you, but there is a position and a tone to the nature of the leadership style, which you can go look at all of that content at thestylecode.com.
Right.
And that's a whole fascinating area as well.
Well, the professionalism that you're talking about is something that still needs to be maintained because a lot of people might read up to this point in the field note and feel like, okay, well, I've been having marital problems, so I'm going to ask a few people.
Yeah, right, exactly.
If they have any advice around that. And that's not what we're saying. Like that's where it would cross the line. Like,
and we often see both leaders and people on a team where you're like, I think you're saying too much out loud.
Right.
Like you should walk that back. So
now
now
the practical suggestion of saying, if you're traveling to Italy, ask around for travel tips. I mean, what a great way to do it. It's a non-work related thing, provided it doesn't feel like you're bragging about where you're going. Maybe that's why some people resist doing that type of thing.
Yeah, right.
But if you just listen to the idea of like who on my team has been to Europe, has been overseas, let me go and ask them if they have any tips about what restaurants I should visit or any sites that I should see while I'm there. What a great thing.
And when you report back on that, like if you just had a great experience on the Big Island in Hawaii with a tour guide, if you recommended that tour guide to somebody and they went and reported back, how good would that make you feel?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and that's true in other behaviors that we mentioned as well. Circling back on advice that you received is great. Sometimes we say, be careful with it because if you're asking for advice in a professional situation and then you don't take that
advice, then you don't take it, right? Yeah.
Then you could find yourself in a little bit of hot water. But
if you don't, you just need to be able to communicate that. In fact, maybe proactively say, not wait for the person to say, did you try my advice? But report back and say, listen, your advice was really spot on. In fact, I should have used it. Like, I thought in the moment I kind of went in another direction and then later I realized you were right all along. So even if that could be a great way to kind of underline how the person's advice was really helpful.
Right. And, people want to be seen. And so if you're showing curiosity this way, that's all you're really saying is like, for me to be able to approach someone who I know has been to Italy and be like, I was listening, you had a good time. I'm headed there with my family. Is there something in particular that I should definitely not like? It's not that they're passionate about talking about Italy. It's like, but what it is you're allowing them to be like, it's a way of saying, I see you, that means something to people. And you're beginning the reciprocal nature of a different kind of relationship. Yeah. Again, at the end of this is you opening up the idea of like, you're a human being who actually can have conversations.
Yeah, and to that point, by the way, on the action, there was a study that I did see a little while ago about leaders who did get this approachability factor, but didn't act on the things that the employees were saying, and then it was then worse for them.
Yes, absolutely.
So if you're going to be the approachable leader, you need to take that responsibility seriously. Now, again, we don't have time to talk about that last part, and in fact, the last part of this was. It was actually the whole section, which we had to break out into about 7 or 8 paragraphs, was in parentheses. and I changed that to just say a final thought,
Yes.
right? Just and now we'll find out if you know, in the writing editing process if anybody objected, but I made that call late last night, and I think it needed to kind of stand on its own and not just parenthetically. There are these leaders who are saying, "Don't bother me."
Right.
And they get a kick out of the feeling of like, well, I've got the office and I've got the parking space and I might give you time, you know, once a month or this and that, but I'm too important for all of this stuff, and I'm certainly
Yes.
not going to ask you about your running shoes.
And all of the conversation in the trenches that is so important for leaders.
And you miss it.
They miss all.
You
of
miss
that.
it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Now, and then I'll just end on this. You know, you did some looking up of studies, and what I did is I went to the major researchers on this, and I called and sent notes, and all of them were like, "Don't bother me."
It's funny. You would think they would
It's not
not
that
do it
funny.
that way.
Yeah.
All right, great.
So,
Well, I
all
look
right.
forward to seeing you face to face here this week.
Yeah, indeed, and we'll do this again tomorrow.
All right, bye now. Thank you.